Hi, everyone. I'm BJ. I'm the genealogy specialist at the Maine State Library. And tonight I'm going to talk about something that people struggle with, that they get scared by. And I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible because it's really something you want to do, but at the same time, there are books. This is Elizabeth Shown Mills's book about documenting stuff. It's pretty scary. I'm a geek about this stuff, and I find this intimidating. Okay. This is the Chicago Manual of Style. Now, not all of this is about citing sources, there's a lot of other stuff, but it's at least as big as Elizabeth Shown Mill's Evidence Explained. I am going to go through two different ways to cite things. One is dealing with original records, and the other is with published books. And I'm going to show you how to make it as easy as possible. Okay? So let me start with the published books, because I'm going to show you my trick for doing this. And yes, you want to know what information you need, but there's actually a shortcut. Let me show you my screen. Hit share screen. And we're going to go to Worldcat, which is an attempt to be a union catalog for most of the libraries in a good chunk of the world. It doesn't always live up to that, but for our purposes, it's going to be enough. So I'm going to put the title of this book, Evidence Explained, in, and now are you seeing my screen? I just want to double check. So we're going to put in Evidence Explained. And you can see it nicely autofills. So we're going to choose this one just because it looks good. And that's often what you'll have. Now you'll notice when we get here, there's a bunch of other things, but you'll notice that there's a 2006. It's evidence analysis, that's a different, but you have two different editions of this. And this one says view all formats and languages. So if we go here, come on. You can see that there's also some question here about which is the third edition, whether it's 2017 or 15. This one says third edition revised, 2017. So I'm guessing that that means that they really should have called it the fourth edition, but they didn't for some reason. But again, you hear it's second edition revised. But we're going to, since the one I have here is 2017, we're going to click here. Now, the information you need is here. Because what you need, basically, for any of you who have a science background, the citation is essentially a reproducible result of the path you use to get to a book or other published material. For those of you who are more literary bent, think of the fairy tale Hansel and Gretel and the idea of breadcrumbs in order to find something. Everyone with me on that? That's what we're doing, is we're trying to make it so that either you, a year from when you use something, or somebody else who's picking up your work can go back and find what you looked at. So to find a published source, like a book, you need the title, you need the author, You need the name of the publishing company, who printed this, where it was printed, if there's more than one edition, and the year it was published. Now, I'm going to show you one reason I do this is if I come here to Worldcat, see where it says Cite Export? If I hit here, it gives me 5 choices of style. So this is the American Psychological Association, the Chicago Manual of Style, University of Chicago, Harvard, MLA is the Modern Language Association, and Turabian is semi-based on Chicago. And so I would suggest for printed books, you choose one of these. I freely admit Chicago is my favorite because I just like the way it's set up. Now you'll notice here, they don't do necessarily give you the publisher. Some of the others do. But I like this because it gives you the author and then the year. And what this does is when you go to sort these, this means that if you have 3 books somebody's written, you'll get the earliest one first when you go to sort them. Let's take a look at MLA. This is not a book that's coming up really well. I'll find another one to show you. But one of the reasons this is nice is if you've forgotten what you need, hitting this, even if you end up with a different format, will get you what you want. So I've got another book here called It's Extraordinary People by Peter May. It's a mystery. So let's take a look at this. And here we have this. And so we're going to hit the citation again. And you can see we're getting that. Now, I often, I am signed into my account here. And one of the things I like about that is I can then save lists. So if I go to my account, here I have a list that's called Boston, Salem, and Eastern Mass. So if I go here, you can see I've got books about the Mayflower. And again, I can go to citations view. And it gives me, this is an APA style. I can change it here with the drop down to Chicago. And if I wanted to drop this into a Word format, I could save it as rich text. That's what goes into a word processing program. And I can hit export and I'll get the thing where you'll see down here at the bottom, I can open that up and have this. But you'll see again here you have, and some of this you'll see they don't have the full citation. Things have evidently been entered wrong, but at least this gives you a starting point to then go back and fill in. So in this case, you'll see that I've got an overdrive. So I've picked up, for this one, this is an ebook version. And I can, right now it's ordered to the ones I've added most recently are at the top, but I can then do author A to Z and it will resort. And here it is in the order I would want it in a bibliography. So, okay, I'll pull my computer closer because we're telling me my voice is going in and out. So we'll see if this works better. Let me try one other. All right. Okay. So this is how I handle written works these days. But again, the basics of what you'll want are the author's name, the date the book was published, the title, and who published it, because that will get you back to the same book. The other thing I do when I'm taking a note of a book, if I'm at a library, I need to stop the share and turn my video on for this. Any book published in the last 30 years or so is going to have an ISBN. It's on the back, it's the International Standard Book Number. And every edition of a book, has its own ISBN. And so often what I will do, in addition to writing down the typical bibliography items, I will write down that ISBN, because at both Amazon and Worldcat, if you put that number in, it will pop up the book that it applies to. Does that make sense? So if you lose track of stuff, this is a good thing to have. You don't want to necessarily put it in your bibliography, but to make sure that you're going back and getting the same thing. So let me start my share screen again. So if we go to advanced search here and put in ISBN, now I'm going to have to look at this 978 019 873 648-6. And there you can see, there's the book I held up. So does that make sense as a handy thing to have? And I will tell you that this is actually coded. If we look down here, the 978 is when they extended from 10 digits to 13 because so many books were published. 0 means it was published in English. The 19 identifies the publisher, which in this case is Oxford University Press. In general, the bigger presses have lower numbers here. Then the number from here to the second to last is their assigning within Oxford UP's numbers, and then the 6 is a digit to check that it's been properly done. It's some sort of formula. So I have another book here that's from a publisher that's much smaller, and it starts 978 for the 13-digit -1, which like 0 means it's printed in English, and then -4402. So that tells you that the publishing company for this is much smaller because that number is much bigger. And I'm telling you this because it's a way, if you've written that down, it's a way to get back. And if you've forgotten one of the other elements, let's say you forget, you write down the author and title and the publisher, but you forget to put the year. If you've got the ISBN, you're able to get back to this to get the book you want. Does that make sense to everybody? Why I'm putting that in with this general keeping track of where you got your information? So again, a lot of this, the elements you want for whichever one of these styles you use are the same. The big thing to remember is consistency. When you go to do a source list for something that you've done, to some extent, it doesn't matter what style you use, as long as you have this information and you're consistent in how you put it together. And so in this case, you have the 3 authors and then the date, title, and publisher. And what you wouldn't want to do is use this and then use one of the other styles that puts the date at the end. You know, things like the commas and the periods, those are less important because, you know, styles vary, not a big deal, as long as you're doing something to distinguish the different elements. But you want to make it easier on yourself and your reader. Just put the elements you're collecting in the same order with each entry. The other thing, there are various programs for doing this. They tend to be aimed at published works. And one of the things that happens in genealogy is we have as many things, at least as many things we deal with that aren't published works, which I'm going to go to next. And many of these programs don't deal that well with non-published works, you know, with original manuscripts and vital records and things like that. They're just not, they're set up for books and magazine, you know, journal and other periodical articles. The one other thing I'll say at this point is if you're basically doing something very similar. If you're citing an article, you do the author's names, the date, name of the article, the name of the journal, and then you're not as concerned about who puts it out, but you put the volume and the date, because that's how you would find which issue of the magazine you want. So, you know, this is really much simpler than your high school English teacher made it sound. Trust me, I spent years teaching freshman comp and at the college level and having to basically unscrew the neuroses from all of my students about dealing with this, which, you know, because you have to do this when you're in college and it's taught in a really generally awful way in high school and not explained well. And basically what this is each of these elements helps you distinguish the book you used from every other book published in history. And, you know, for some things now, you probably could just use an ISBN and the page number. But that doesn't get you books that were published before the 1970s. So you're going to have to learn this for older, because again, we use older books. Let's just very quickly, I want to get to the, and show you an older one at archive.org. So let's look for this. And there's a reason I'm pulling this one up. So here we have the Danvers Vital Records. Now, these are the TAN books, which are also at Ancestry and MyHeritage. And so I wanted to bring this up because what I suggest is when you're using a book like this that's online, do the original citation for the book and then put the web, and I'll show you a sample of this in a minute, but do then do the website you saw it, colon, accessed and the date you saw it. So if I were, and I would probably here, because they have it from different sources, I would probably put Boston Public Library via archive.org or Allen County Public Library at archive.org or the Library of Congress, because you may have cases where someone skipped a page, you have things written in it. It's not the case with this one, but on some of these, there were 2 editions and it's not clearly marked. So let's go into one of these. Let's go into the Boston Public Library. So if I were citing this, I would come down here and I would call it, there's no real author. So I would just put it, Vital Records of Danvers, Massachusetts. And I'd pull the full title, including volume 1, births. And then the date. Now you'll see here, they've actually got the author is the town of Danvers, which you probably could also do if you wanted to. And you can see it was published in 1909 by the Essex Institute in Salem. And what's nice here is somewhere here, here's the full catalog record that will give you data if you aren't sure. But again, they're giving you most of the information here that you would need. I thought there was a way to cite it, but it looks like they don't have that. It may just, so, and then they nicely show you similar items at the bottom. And like, here's another one version, and you can see, I don't know who uploaded it, but you can see why they're called the TAN books. So, but that's my suggestion when you're viewing things online like this. Do the citation for the item, and then put at the end the name of the website where you accessed it and the date. So let me, at this point, stop sharing my screen and go into my quick and easy PowerPoint. And I'm going to switch to, so what about when we deal with original records? Can you see you can see my screen? Okay. So again, when we're dealing with original records, here's what you need. This is the way I do it. This is not based on Elizabeth Shown Mills's stuff. This is how I learned to do it for original documents at the Strathclyde program. And I find it works fairly well for almost everything. And it's relatively simple. And so, with my becoming a certified genealogist, I'm having to use Elizabeth Shown Mills's style. But for my personal work and for things I'm doing for whenever I have the occasional time I have a paid client these days, this really works as the full, what I need, when I've got somebody who wants to see my results and isn't too concerned about going back and finding stuff or whatever, but this does work for going back and finding things. So I start the citation with the type of the document: birth, death, census, probate. I put in the date, and I do it by year, and then any other dates that are there. Because that way, again, if you have several births listed, they'll sort chronologically. And then I say location here, basically that means the jurisdiction. And on almost all of the records, you're going to get something, you're going to have the jurisdiction. And I'll show you some examples with that. Then the people involved. Who's the person in the census you're looking at? Who are the two people in the marriage record? Are you citing a witness in someone's will to prove that they were still alive at a certain date? I would then put the witness's name, comma, witness to will of, and then the name of that person. If there are page references, I'd put them in at that point. And there may be other references. Lots of, if you've dealt with things in archives, you'll know that they often have another reference number. For example, I know several places I've done research, the family files of papers donated. So for example, a Weston family would be WE, and then, if they were the fourth family starting WE that got a file, they'd be WE4. And then if there was more than one file, it would be WE4-A-B-C. So that's the kind of reference number I'm talking about here. When it may not be a page number. Then the collection is, say the US federal census, or it can be a sub-collection like the Maine Old Cemetery Association records. The repository is who owns the record. And then the point of access, that's where you put a website that you've gone through. So let's take a look at some samples. So here's a naturalization petition for a family I'm working on. And so type of document is naturalization petition. And I've separated these out online so you can see them. If I were doing them as a citation, I would have them all, in paragraph format. So I've got naturalization petition, and you can see down here, it's 1934. It's in the Federal District Court at Cleveland, Ohio, so that's the jurisdiction. It's for Lazarus Collins, with the original name of Lazarus Kalinsky. And I put both names in because you don't know, you want to make sure you have both of them there. So if someone's looking and you want to make sure they see that both, and this is pretty easy, that if they went and saw Lazarus Kalinsky, they'd go, oh, Lazarus Collins. But that's, if it is a name change like this, because it specifically says Lazarus Kalinsky, known as and changed to Lazarus Collins. So I've included that here. This number 70439 is up here in the corner. And then this is in the collection at Ancestry called Ohio US Naturalization Petition and Record Books, 1888 to 1946. So that's the set of documents. And then the access point is Ancestry, and I accessed it today. Does that make sense to everybody? This would get you enough to get back to find this record again. I could also, if I were being really complete, you can work out what National Archives record collection and publication and film number this was, but that's a little, you don't need that to get back to it. I think I would, I tend to put that in because I know sometimes people are not working at Ancestry, and this means that you could find this at Family Search, My Heritage, or down at the NARA site at Waltham, or if somebody's at the Cleveland Public Library and they have these for the Cleveland area, they could get back to this film without going through Ancestry. Does this make sense to everybody? So here's one. This is a letter from my couple grades grandmother to her future sister-in-law. And so I've got letter as the type of, and you could choose a different, you could call it correspondence if you want. Just be consistent. If you go with letter, use letter all the time. Don't alternate between letter and correspondence unless you have a good reason. You know, I could see using letter for when I have half of the conversation and correspondence if I have the reply as well. Does that make sense as a distinction? But if you don't have that kind of distinction, it's not worth doing. And again, I put the year and then the date, because that helps sort these so that all of the 1805 ones would be together in a source list. I put the person the letter is from and who it's to. This is in a sub-collection that's just called the Weston Family Papers. It's at the Danvers Archival Center in Danvers, Massachusetts. I probably should put Danvers, Mass here. I have so many citations from them that I basically put it in a note at the beginning of the bibliography saying Danvers Archival Center is this, it is the this town archives at the Peabody Library in Danvers, Massachusetts. And then I happened to view this on this date. I've seen it at other times, but that's the date I took the picture. So that's the date I put in there. I'd seen it before, a year or two before and a year or two after, but I figure if I ever got called on this, this is the date I took the picture, so I can defend this as a choice for date. And again, I've sort of separated this out with each element on its own line so you could read it. If I would not have put, this would all be on one line if I were doing this. Is everyone clear on this so far? Now here's where it gets interesting. So here's a baptism at Scotland's People. And again, my type of record, baptism, year. And this tells me, and I know you can't really see it, but it says that little Catherine was baptized on the 20th of May, 1855. It also gives her birth date. And I put that here as well, just because this one happens to be in 1855 and you get an actual real birth certificate or birth record, but before 1855 you don't. And so that may be the only source of it. And I figure I throw it in here because it's easy. So I then put in that this took place at St. Mary's Roman Catholic Cathedral. That's in a different, or sorry, you can see it here. Edinburgh St. Mary's Cathedral. There's actually both a St. Mary's Roman Catholic Cathedral and a Church of England Cathedral, an Anglican Cathedral, which is why I put the RC in. It should be clear from the Catholic Register's line, but occasionally I want to be more clear. So here's the name of the person involved. I often capitalize the last name just to make it easy to see. You'll see this is on page 47, and she's here on the top line. The collection is the Catholic Registers. And then here's where I accessed it at scotlandspeople.gov.uk and this, but this information is enough to get you back to this record. then here's the birth. And what we've got here, you'll see I did birth instead of baptism. I did the year and the birth date. I just put Edinburgh. Again, if I were being really careful, I'd put Edinburgh, Scotland. Here's her name. And then this 685/4 identifies Edinburgh is 685 and 4 is the parish within Edinburgh. And then she was the 328th birth entry for this parish for this year. And that number is right here. It's in the statutory registers. Remember, here I put the Catholic registers. Here it's in the statutory registers, but this is the same thing because I accessed it at the same place. So this is the statutory registers, or Catholic registers are the collection. And this is where I accessed it. Now, if I had gone and seen this in person, I would have put National Records of Scotland and the date I saw it, rather than Scotland's people. So here's an interesting one. This is a diary. Let me stop the screen share for a minute so I can show you. You probably can't see it, but there's a copy of the first page of the diary. And I had seen this years and years and years and years ago, as you can see by this citation. And then discovered when I was in Salt Lake City, let me turn screen sharing back on so you can see this. Found that in 2014, this diary was transcribed and printed in this journal. So this is the transcription for the original diary. Except it's not, sorry. It should not say transcript for the original. These are the dates the diary covers. These are the two people who kept it. I saw the original at this place and the date I saw it. Now, if I were going to cite this photocopy I made out of this journal, I would put the transcript, and then I would cite, I would take out the viewed and put in the citation for the journal. So I would put the Susquehanna County Historical Society Journal, volume 25, 2014, number, I think it was in number 1. So this is a case where I would, depending on which one I was working with, you know, I have my notes from seeing it. I would cite the original. If I was working from the photocopy from the journal, I'd cite that. So one of the big things to remember is you cite what you've actually seen. You know, if I hadn't seen the original, I would only cite the journal and not the original, because I would not have seen the original. And this is one thing to, you know, when you look at old New England records and think, you know, old probate, old deeds, things like that, that have been transcribed, early court records. You know, I know that for both Plymouth and Essex counties in Massachusetts, a lot of early court records have been transcribed. You cite the transcription, not the original, if that's what you've looked at. So, one more example. This is actually my father, about 8 or 9 months old, in this 1930 census. Oops, sorry about that. And as you can see, all of the information you need is actually right here. So I put census in 1930, because that's the year. So this has already narrowed it down. Of all of the US federal censuses, we're only looking at 1930. So we're not looking at 1920, not looking at 1940. Then we narrow it down more, down to just Buffalo and Erie County, New York. And then the person we're interested in is Charles P. Jameson. This is one of the things I haven't seen other people do, but I like doing it on a census. I put the household of and whoever the head of the household is, if it's not the person I'm looking for. And the reason for that is that I started doing this back when things were much more complex at finding things and things weren't as well indexed. And so there were cases where having the name of the head of the household made it easier to go back and find something again. And it's a quick, this way I have two names, and if I'm having trouble finding this again, I at least have a second name to try. And then here's the information that's the equivalent of a page number in a book. We have enumeration district 15-2257, which you see here. Sheet 9A, and then he's on line 5. And I saw this at Ancestry, so I put that there. And what I'm going to do is let's open up Ancestry again. And I'm going to show you how we can use that citation I just did to wait a second. Okay, can you see Ancestry now? Okay, so I'm going to go to search census and voter lists, because first thing in the citation said census, right? And I said in it, US federal census collection, so we're going to go there. And we said 1930. You're going to scroll down to 1930. We're going to choose New York, Erie County, Buffalo, and you'll notice they've split Buffalo's districts into 3, and we want 257. So we want Buffalo 257. And we scroll down here to 257. And let me make this a little bigger so you can see it. So we're at page 1A. So I'm going to make a guess that 9A is going to be page 18. Oops, went too far. So we're going to back up just a little bit. And there's 9B. And there we have 9A. And there's the family. My father and his parents and siblings and a boarder. So does that make the elements of what you're collecting more sensible? To see how I was able to take what I put in the citation and use it to get back to the same record? You know, as I said, it's breadcrumbs, reproducible results, whatever you want to think of it as. So, all right, so I'm going to do 2 more. Yes, Pam is still here. She, I'm going to use you as an example, Pam, that she actually emailed me and said she was glad that I was doing this. So I asked her for a couple examples of what she's had trouble with, and we're going to work through how I would cite them. So here we have, this looks like it's baptisms for a Presbyterian church in, or is this deaths, Pam?
A death.
Okay, so these are, so I would put death as the first thing. And it's for 1824. So I would have death, period, 1824, period. Londonderry, New Hampshire Presbyterian Church. And then I need to, and so it's for Joshua Conant. So I would put that as the name. Or is he in, is his death in 1824 or 25?
25, I think.
Yeah, so I would put that. This looks like it might be page 162.
Mhm.
I would double check, but I would put the page number. Then the next thing I would put would be U.S. Presbyterian Church Records, 1700 to 1970, as the collection name. And then I put ancestry in the date access. One of the things you can do, let's see if this does it. Now, in this case, I could get a fairly clean URL. Can you see up here in the URL, the address bar?
I see you.
Oh, did I lose? Sorry. Let's go back here. Okay, now I'm screen sharing.
Okay.
I was able, I basically, this had, you see how this URL has the question mark and then some
Mhm.
clutter?
Yes.
I took off from the question mark on. Oh, come on. And hit hit enter, and it got me the same record. So I would probably, on this case, because you can get this is a relatively clean URL.
Okay.
Often these addresses are 3 lines long.
Yeah.
I don't save those, but this is relatively clean. I would put this in the citation with the ancestry part of it, or on the next line after you're done, just so that you have that and you can go back.
Okay.
Ancestry is doing a better job than they used to about having a static URL so that you can go back to something.
Mm-hmm.
But, 5 years ago, you couldn't do that. Things moved around. And so that's why I tend to not do the really long. The longer it is, the more likely it is to change in my experience. But certainly it's not awful to put this in.
Okay.
And if you're submitting for publication, they can always take it out if it's not their house style.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
We're citing the record rather than, ancestry. If you go in here, let's go to this. They will tell you, this isn't one of the really bad ones, but they will give you a citation on many of these. That's, here, ancestry.com with this. And this stinks it doesn't tell you what you need to know.
Mhm.
They did not produce this. And this first slot here generally should be, if there's somebody, if you know who produced it, that's who should be in that slot.
Okay.
And so I would rather go with citing it as an original record that you saw online than something that's Ancestry's. I might try, depending on what I was doing and how I was doing it, I might try to work Presbyterian Historical Society in as well somewhere.
Okay.
Possibly in the repository slot between the collection and Ancestry.
Okay.
Just because in this case, and this is one of the things that's worth doing, is when you find a collection, when you find a record, when it's got a collection here at the top, which almost all of Ancestry's do,
Right. Yep.
it's worth clicking through for two reasons. One is you want to read about what's actually included.
Mhm.
And two, it may give you information about where the originals are. And that may well be worth working into the source, even if you haven't seen the original in person, so that somebody who was there could go, someone could say, oh yeah, I'm going down to the Presbyterian Historical Society for something else, or the Essex Institute in Salem for something else.
Mhm.
Let me take a look at this. So it's not necessary in this case, but it won't hurt.
Okay.
And so that would be and again, if you went into the Methodist records, you would do wherever those are, and so on. Does that make sense as a way to do that one?
Yes, thank you.
So here's another interesting one. This looks like it's probate.
Yes.
I pulled it up without really looking at it. I admit. It was like 10 of 7 when I saw your email. So again, I would start with probate 1781, Londonderry, New Hampshire, or whatever county Londonderry's in, if that's the level that this is at.
Okay. Rockingham. Yep.
So I would try to put Londonderry, Rockingham, because that helps if there's a Robert Adams from a different town
Mhm.
who happened to die about the same time. It would help you distinguish between the one from Derry and the one from Londonderry.
Okay.
Then I would put his name, then this number, and I would probably put in this as well, Family
Okay.
History Library, FHL film, and this number, and possibly, pay the page numbers within the film. And then again, if you go back to this film number, here's the collection name, which is
Okay.
the Hampshire County Probate Estate Files.
All right.
And then do the same thing with FamilySearch.org and the data access. Does that make sense how I found this collection?
Yeah, I guess one of my questions was, it seemed like so much information, but you really do need all of that. Is that that's what I'm understanding, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Because the thing is, people are good at words and they're not good at numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And this number gets you to that film.
Mm-hmm.
And then the page number you gave me got me to that page.
Yep.
But people are going to do better with reading this.
Okay.
I have heard a couple of the big names in genealogy say that it's not unreasonable to expect that half a page, every page is citations
Okay.
when you get up to the real high level stuff. And some of that depends on, if you've got what one document you're pulling a lot out of, you may not have that much on a page. But if you've got 3 kids where you're documenting their birth, marriage, and death on the same page, just those 3 things are going to be 6 citations.
Right.
If you've got 2 kids, birth, marriage, and death, that's 6 citations. If you add anything about like the spouse's birth date, that's another citation for each spouse.
Mm-hmm.
And I freely admit I'm not as good on when I am working on stuff just for me, I admit there are times I just write DNV for Danvers VRs. Because if all I'm doing is filling out how my particular set of people out of 3 different books, I'm actually confirming these 3 genealogy books with the vital records.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yeah, it's there. But that's enough for me to know if I ever go back and write that I found this in the Danvers vital records.
Yep.
And if it was something weird, like I was looking for a family named Sizer, and I found little Mary Sizer's birth record under Mary Lizer because somebody misread the L, or the S is an L. I put that like Danvers VR Lizer, and I probably circle or underline the L so that when I go back to find it, I know that it's not where I'm expecting it. And I've given myself enough of a clue. But the other thing to remember is the harder the problem you're solving, the more citations you'll want.
True. Okay.
If you've just got an easy family in the late 19th century who all stayed put right in Middleton, Massachusetts, and you're not chasing them all over New England and the upper Midwest, that's a lot easier, because you're just going to be able to say, do a full citation for the first birth, and then after it say hereafter Middleton vital records for Middleton births. Whereas if you've got a family like mine where the kids are off to Wisconsin and Kansas, and the grandkids are off to Colorado and Texas, you're going to have a lot more detailed citations.
Okay.
Does that make sense to everybody? I don't want to scare you off. You don't necessarily need to do a huge full citation for every single thing. If you do quick citations that are enough for you to go back to make sure that you can go back and get the full citation if you need to prove something to someone, or you want to go back, and you've last looked at this family 3 years ago and you're now a better researcher, or you found out more about the spouses who married in and you want to go back and look at the family that you looked at 3 years ago. Keep track of it. But that's one reason the ISBN is nice on the newer books, is that it's often quicker than filling out, that and a author and title is enough to get back to the same one consistently. Older books don't have that, but on all of this, you're basically trying to say, how do I distinguish this particular piece of paper, whether it's a page in a book or a loose probate file, from every other piece of paper in the world? And how can I get back to this paper that I've distinguished from every other piece of paper in the world?
Yep. Okay.
Does
Thank
that
you.
make sense to everybody? Yeah. Don't get hung up on the format. I've seen way too many people. The final format is a final part of it. It's when you've done all the research and you're double checking and you're getting ready to hand it over to somebody to read. That's when you worry about where the periods and the commas and the colons go. But at the point where you're working, if you get something out of order, don't sweat it. Just make sure you have the elements there so that you can fix it when you're ready.
Sounds good.
Any other questions? I hope I sort of demystified this process for you. No questions?
Well, so I've got another question.
Sure.
So going back to the evidence explained, and like, it's really fussy work.
Yes.
And so when do you do that? And I'm thinking in particular, like the census records for, the newer censuses want the dwelling and the family rather than the line, or,
Yeah.
When do you go to that level?
When you're finishing.
Okay.
Because if I find the line easier,
Yeah.
and so that's what I work with. And then when I'm finishing something, I go back because I want to double check everything before I submit something anyway.
Okay. Okay.
And so that's the point where I go in and say, yep, I did line 3, and now I'm going to, and to me, the line is better because the dwelling and the household gets you just to the household, not the particular individual.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And what if you, in the case of one I was looking at recently, you have 3 John Putnams, a man, his son, and his grandson all living in the same house.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yes, you've probably in the text distinguished which one you're interested in because you've talked about him by age or profession or something like that. But what if all 3 of them are shoemakers?
Yep.
And because you're laughing, but I have had this happen, or 3 generations of a family where they're all farmers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if they've got the same name, getting in the household, you have to have some other, you have to then make sure your text distinguishes which one of them you're talking about, versus if you put the line number, it's clear.
Right.
But that's my little soapbox. I have a friend that she and I have gone back and forth on this, but her family's Jewish, and so there are almost never living relatives with the same name living in a house together, because Eastern European Jews do not name after living relatives, which to my mind, Scots, Irish, and New England mind, having lived in the household with me and my mother and my grandmother all being Barbara, is a little mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And my brother having the same name as grandfather on the other side, and an uncle and a couple cousins, all named after the grandfather, who did happen to be deceased by the time all the cousins were named for him. But so for me, that even if I put in the other information, I still stick the line number in there, because again, that's a unique identifier of that particular record. If you've got more than one person in a household, it narrows it down to that particular person in the census, not the household that may have 2 members with the same name. Does that make sense, Pam?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
But yeah, this is I sort of, and I admit some of this is me being a complete geek about this, but I kind of view doing the citations at the end. Yes, they're fussy, but it's like doing the decoration, the frosting decorations on the cake. You
Yeah.
have the cake that's the real work. You have the layer of frosting that's the whole cover, which is your quick and dirty beginning citations. And then the flowers and the floof and all of that make the cake, oh wow. That's that last level of checking the citations, making sure the pictures are in the right place. Maybe doing a call out to have a little side box explaining something. That's kind of that putting the finishing touches and making the fiddly little rose petals and things out of frosting.
Mm-hmm. So here's a question too. For something like the Nathan Hale Cemetery Collection, which is available at Family Search and at Ancestry, is there a preference to citing one or the other, or would you cite both if you'd seen him?
Whichever one you used for that particular item.
Okay.
I think I would tend, if I were using that in an article, I would choose one and find them all in the same one, because that way you can then do, if you've got 15 of them on the first one, you can say hereafter Hale collection it,
right,
and shorten the citation.
Yeah,
but that's getting into upper level stuff that but I know this is one of those things that most people have some high school related trauma about. And so, I mean, I do, and I've spent years teaching this and being an editor and dealing with this. And it was funny, by the time I got to doing the Strathclyde genealogy program, I'd gotten it in college, high school and college, my first round of graduate school, teaching it, becoming an editor and doing stuff with it, going to library school and getting a semester's worth of it again. And then finally doing the Strathclyde program. And it was like, really? Can I just skip this? But on the other hand, it was funny because at first the Harvard style that I showed you, the modified Harvard style that I showed you with the type of record and such for the original records, at first I didn't like, but I've now come to actually prefer it for things that are not published. Because and then when obviously when you're citing something in a footnote, it doesn't matter, but when I do the sources at the end of a paper for things where I have a whole, essentially a bibliography, all of the births sort together, all of the deaths, all of the probate. And I kind of like that as a system. It fits how my brain works.
Okay.
I will also say, from what I've heard from people, wherever you submit something for publication, even if you think you followed their style, they will change things.
Yep, that's what I'm finding too.
And so the big thing on your end, as you're writing, any of you, is just to be consistent. And so that way, whoever's changing things has something consistent to work from to simplify changing it.
Good.
And that way, if they want parentheses around the date and you've just got periods, they can just mindlessly go through and change that one thing. So Sam, I see you're here. If you're paying attention, anything else you want to say from an archival standpoint, putting you on the spot? Yeah. Oh.
Sorry, I'm here. I can't get my camera to go, but anyways, I was just gonna say one thing about the question before about Ancestry versus Family Search, that I tend to, if it's something available in multiple places, I will generally use the one that's the freest or the most accessible in my citations. Not everyone has an Ancestry account. So if it's available at Family Search, I will generally cite it there when I can. Same, one step further, like with the Canadian Census, which I use, I will cite it from Library and Archives Canada as opposed to Family Search, because Family Search, while free, you still have to register. But Library and Archives Canada, you can just see the images. So I tend to do the least, or the most accessible is the one I'll pick.
Thanks. That's a good point.
Yeah, the least burden on the person reading, I guess, is for getting at it. That's a very good point. I'm glad I put you on the spot.
And I know one thing we've been trying to do is sort of create good citations, like at the state archives when we can. I mean, most people never actually ask for a citation. They're just kind of like, we want the record, so we don't really worry about it so much. But I've sort of tried to adopt what NARA uses as their recommended citation forms, just to get better. Because we've had a lot of cases where people come back to us and say, oh, I saw this thing cited, but it just says, Maine State Archives. And I'm like, that doesn't help me. So I'm trying to really build up our citations for people when they're actually using it for something other than, their personal use.
Yeah. And so that's a good object lesson, that almost anything past Maine State Archives would then help Sam help you find the same thing again. And that's basically what you want, is something that when you come into me or to Sam, me at the library or Sam at the archives, with a piece of paper, and I've had this happen. Somebody brings in a photocopy and they say, I need to go back to this book. What is this? I didn't write it down. And I have about an 80% success rate at tracking the books down. But that means I've got a 20% failure rate. So you don't want to rely on that. Scribble it down. Even if it's nothing but the author's name and 2 words out of the title, that's better than nothing, because we can probably find it from that. I know that's semi-heretical of me to say, but it's the half a loaf is better than no loaf version of this. Obviously, if you have not only have the full loaf, but you say it's pumpernickel with date and pecan, we'll be able to find the exact thing for you. But that's the range. So, okay, I'm going to stop the recording at this point. And okay, well, thank you for so many of you showing up for what I know is not the world's most stimulating topic, but it's really vital. It will save you time in the long run to write down where you find things. Trust me. This is the voice of experience. Even as somebody who was an editor and a freshman comp instructor and had this drilled into her in college, I admit, when I started research on genealogy, I was like, oh, I'll remember where I found this. I have one of those, where is this from, ones that I need to take into work and work on for myself. I pulled out a file I hadn't looked at in a decade, and I evidently forgot to write down where it came from, and oops. So that's where we are. So, but yeah, I'm impressed how many of you showed up tonight, so thank you. Anything else anyone has?